On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we are fortunate to be joined by Sandy and Randy from the AT Corner podcast. We talk about it in the episode, but it's amazing that we haven't connected, and also a little embarrassing, especially for me, over the course of time and for the amount of episodes that both of us have been putting out and for how long we've been doing it. But it was great to finally connect with them, hear a little bit more of the origin story around the AT Corner podcast, all the fantastic work that they're doing, how they really focus on bringing both research but also just stories from athletic training, trying to create a community of support for ATs, which is something that I can echo is so important. And what we also strive to do is just be a resource and also a place for everything that ATs might need outside of their day-to-day. But great episode. Really enjoyed talking to them. Looking forward to connecting with them more in the future and hopefully actually meeting in person at some point. If you haven't heard of Wave On Health yet, give them a look. Adam Halpern was on the podcast just recently talking about that. Got a few more coming up with him and some different aspects of stuff, but it's a really unique angle to help ATs in every setting provide more value in what they do, help take some load off of them while still providing high level of care. Check them out. If it's something that you're interested in, let them know you heard about it on AT Chat. We'd appreciate that. And just see what they have. It's a really unique option that if I was in a place to explore it, i.e. I had the position or the money to go ahead and do that, I most definitely would. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Thank you to them for everything that they do to support us as the podcast and also the AT profession. Always please consider them, or if you have an idea that you'd like to see come to life, they're always up to listen to that as well. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Sandy and Randy Harris of the AT Corner podcast. We were just talking about how all of us are probably a little embarrassed that it's taken this long, however long we want to say that is, to actually connect. I know you guys weren't in Indy this past year, but I was kind of hoping you would be, because that would have been a good time to get together, but hopefully in future ones. But here to talk just about the start of AT Corner podcast. We were talking offline about some of the different podcasts out there, so I'm looking forward to hearing the origin story. But before we jump into that, I wanted to turn it over to both of you to just introduce yourselves, give a little bit of background, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. Yeah, seriously, I don't know how it's taken this long for us to connect, because I feel like we have kind of been like dancing around each other, and how we like finally our worlds have finally collided. But yeah, I'm Sandra, or Sandy, either way. I work in the community college setting in Southern California. I used to do a lot of performing arts, but now I'm back in traditional, and I work with two other athletic trainers. So there's three of us, and we have 22 sports. So we kind of get like a lot of like, we have our own separate sports, but we also are really collaborative. So I feel like it's really cool because it's not just one sport, and then you can just, keep it fresh.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, when you started your introduction, I was ready to jump into our normal thing. I'm Sandy, and I'm Randy. So I was ready for it. So I'm Randy. Currently I'm in the community college setting, but I have definitely bounced around the different levels of athletics. I've been at a NAIA institution. I've worked Division One, and then I've also done some volunteer work with USA Track and Field. So I've definitely seen a wide spectrum. I've gradually increased my number of sports from just having one to now I think I have nine. I have a lot now. I have more than one.
Yeah.
So it's been a really cool learning experience, and I feel like I'm doing more of like a service to a population that sometimes like doesn't have a lot at its disposal. So it's been a pretty cool and rewarding experience for sure.
That's awesome. We were also talking offline. You're both currently in a DAT program. Started up this past fall, plus, 500,000 sports to cover in your current setting, but also started a podcast, which coming from me is rich because I tend to have more irons in the fire than I should. But anyway, what was the origin story of starting it? How'd you come up with the name? Kind of what led you to get started with the AT Corner podcast?
Yeah, that is a great question. For years, I always talked about like, man, it'd be really cool to start a podcast. And I probably didn't start seriously like thinking about it until right around 2019, 2020, where I was just like, man, I really want to start a podcast. Like I love, like we've said on our podcast, I love reading. I love trying to just learn more and like just try to really build my toolkit. But I also like having a discussion about education topics in a very like easy, digestible way. I feel like sometimes like when you go to a conference and stuff, like that information can be intimidating and like they're throwing out a lot of like formalities, big words, and you're like, okay. So I really like being able to have like just like a digestible conversation. So I was like, man, being able to present this maybe like on a podcast would be so cool. Just get the conversation started. And Sandra was very supportive. She was like, I'll do everything on the back end.
I grew up like making videos and kind of just
nice.
around like just video editing and kind of stuff like that. So I was like, perfect. Like you do the content and I'll be the back end. I'll be the social media. I do all that stuff. And you just like you talk. I bought one microphone for Christmas. I bought one microphone and I said, here you go. This is for you.
So I don't know how I suckered her in to be on this side of the camera.
Because he does all the reading. And so like for me, it was like I don't like public speaking and he loves public speaking. And so I was like, I'm like so vulnerable for me to be behind the microphone and say things, especially in my young career, that other people are going to have access to for the rest of my career. Like that it just sounds so overwhelming. But honestly, the reward of it, of actually like the impact that we've been able to make with on not just young athletic trainers, but seasoned athletic trainers, and just the vast community that's out there that's kind of tuned in and listened, and we've got nothing but support. And so it was really intimidating at first, but I think I'm really happy that I think we make a good pair.
Yeah, for sure.
It's always something and it's my favorite compliment when I have people on like, oh, this is the first podcast I've ever done. Like, I'm really nervous. And I try and always calm people's fear. It's a conversation. There's no, from my end, like there's no gotcha moments. Like I'm not trying to, there are things out there like that, but that is not how I ever wanted to go about it. A little bit more detail on like the origin story. Was there something specific, in terms of the reading or just what was being out there in terms of the podcast realm or just even AT podcast realm or even just on the bigger, kind of AT information front that you saw that you wanted to kind of fill in a gap or maybe enhance a little bit? Was that kind of the focus of starting it, or how did that all come to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of that paired in just how new information is being brought out, right? It's very like formal and technical and can be intimidating sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't take in necessarily what the realities of what some athletic trainers are going through. Like you hear some of these things like, oh, well, like that doesn't really work in my setting, so I don't know how I'm going to do it. And then it just kind of gets forgotten, or, you're just like, oh, well, I can't use it anyways. So that's really what we wanted to build on is, okay, well, here's all this evidence, but now let's also pair it with experience. What have other athletic trainers done and are doing with like the evidence that we know, or like, hey, we know this, but here's how I've had to kind of tailor it for my setting. And I think that's really where those like story episodes that we do have been huge. And, we always joke around how like our episodes are like two different like settings, like, oh, one's stories, one's education, but in reality, they are all education in some way.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest things is like when we would go to conferences or even in like going through school and going through our programs, which a lot of people think we went to the same program. Actually, he did his bachelor's program at Cal State Fullerton, and I did a master's program at Chapman University. So like we both have different backgrounds in terms of like going through like the bachelor's versus master's program, going through different programs. But anyway, he I think going through school and going through conferences, you kind of get the foundation of things. But it doesn't go, a lot of times it doesn't go further than that unless you take like a full course.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of times that it's like, okay, someone gets a face injury, you have to refer. Okay, but where do we refer? How does that look like? What does that look like? How long are you going to be there? Like, what are the steps involved in that process rather than just like the theory of you have to refer? Okay, yes, we know that, but what does that actually look like in real life? Because we know that nothing's really like the book. And even like from one person to another person, or one injury to another injury, like we know they can present differently, and we know that each athletic trainer is going to handle it differently. And so kind of getting that idea of what does the literature say that we're supposed to do, and what do people actually do, and what actually works in real life. So that's kind of like where we're trying to bridge that gap. And then also kind of going back to that origin story, actually. So Randy was like, I want to do these education episodes, and I want to do these readings, and all this. And I was like, great, that is your strength, definitely. I would love to, now that I've jumped on board, I'd love to be a part of that. However, like if I'm going to be part of this, I also want to make it my own too. Like we all love Randy's show, but I want a part of this too, So that's where the story episodes came in, because I felt like I could kind of spearhead those a little bit better. So then that's where we also were able to pair that, where it's like Randy's side are more the evidence side, my story episodes are more the experience side, and we kind of like bridge that gap in so many different ways.
And I think one of the areas that like talking about like, oh, did you see like a gap in there with like our story episodes and like that experience piece is, we've brought up topics to where, it's given a lot of young professionals, like maybe hopefully some comfort in their experience, right? When you're a young professional, newly certified, man, you get out there and you're just like, I don't think I know anything. I don't think I know how to be an athletic trainer. And we've created this platform to where you hear all these other experiences. Everyone has went through this. And so everyone understands what you're going through. So we have been able to be, lucky enough to create this community where hopefully our listeners do feel supported and feel like, hey, what? Other people are going through this. I can work through this. And we celebrate that story of being able to find support out there.
We talk a lot about mentorship, and I think that even beyond the mentorship in your everyday life, that of the people who you will have access to, I think also having access to not only just us but our community is something that we really wanted to build upon.
Yeah, I think it's so important I would always say that to the students I precepted with, or was their preceptor, and it's like, I'm telling you this because I screwed this up, and it was something that you can learn from my screw up. You don't need to do it. Having made all these mistakes in my own career, and there were plenty. I also really like how you're saying kind of that when you talk. I don't go to as many conferences as I'd like to, but you go to a lot of them, and you kind of get the, here's what's going on and here's what it is, but the application of that knowledge isn't always the strongest part or the biggest part of that talk. It kind of leaves you wondering, like, great, we identified said problem, but what does that actually mean? Like, how do I actually use that, or where would it fit? So I think that's a fantastic thing to be thrown in there as well. How'd you come up with a name? And I also am curious if there's two versions of this, because your email address is slightly different than the just straight podcast name, but I'll leave that to you.
So I remember that I was doing a lot of per diem work, and I was at a volleyball tournament and I was kind of sitting there, volleyball, there's some interesting parts, and then after a tournament you're just staring at volleyball for hours and hours and hours, and you're just like, I'm on hour 11 and it's the same thing Okay, sounds good. I don't know any of these kids. So I just kind of had some time to like think. I know Randy had said that he wanted a podcast, and I got on the mic. At this point, we still only had one microphone, and so I was kind of like throwing out ideas. I think that did you throw out some at first?
That it's funny that you asked that. I was trying to remember.
I
Man,
I
shoot, how
wish
did
that
we
we
come up with
I
this
wish that
name?
we had written down some
Yeah.
names, but I remember that we were trying to go ATC, like something with a C. Kind of like athletic training chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guilty there too. Yeah.
But we didn't want to. I knew about AT chat, and so I didn't want to make it like yours is like the ATC, and I was like, man, I don't want to get too close because
Yeah.
obviously like we respect you. So we didn't want to like be exactly the same, but
Yeah.
it was like something we were trying to think of, like something that would be searched as well. So then
And I felt like the corner too was like kind of casual, like it's
yeah, so we were thinking like, okay, so like AT I don't remember some it was like what, 4 years ago
Yeah.
now. But we were like sitting like AT something, AT something, AT something, and then we were like AT corner.
Yeah.
AT corner. Oh man, I think that's stuck. I think that sounds good. And so then I'm sitting at this volleyball tournament, and I'm like trying to figure out how to draw like the rod of Asclepius in the athletic training symbol. And I'm trying to figure out how to draw it like as part of the T, or I'm trying to figure out like how to make it look like a corner, or like how to.
I'm sure we have these drawings somewhere too.
It was on a post-it. I have a
Yeah.
picture of it on a post-it at the volleyball tournament. I think I posted it like a few years ago, but I'll have to find it again. And so essentially I came home and I was like, look, I have our logo, which is completely different than our actual logo. But I was like, look, I have it. And then I just sat down I use Procreate on the iPad, and I just started like kind of figuring out some different like logo ideas, and then AT corner, the little AT in the corner kind of stuck.
There you go. It's amazing how close like the coming up with the names and the designs, like the one we went with wasn't the one I had originally kind of drawn up and utilized Fiverr and just kind of sent to me like, hey, can you turn this into a digital one? And then they sent me back like the other options, and I honestly got outvoted on the one I thought was good. So hey, it's worked out well for us. So I'm not complaining about it, but yeah, that's how it kind of ended up with ours too. But yeah, I remember scouring social media because there's like, what AT podcasts are there? And Jeremy Jackson with the sports medicine broadcast, kind of covering a whole bunch of things. And then Tom, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, starts with the B, Borowski. Sorry, Tom, if I'm butchering that. Had AT Talks that he did for a little while. And then that one kind of seemed to like not do anything for a while. So I was like, oh, maybe that one doesn't exist anymore. And then he kind of revived it back and forth. So yeah, I remember doing all that, kind of looking around to make sure we weren't ripping anybody off as well if it already existed.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of going in. Oh, go ahead.
We were like AT chat. Man, that sounds so good.
I know. Yeah.
We were very jealous of yours.
I don't know how I come up with them, and like it's just sitting and thinking about it, because even for our kind of like mother podcast, if you will, like Clinically Pressed, man, we went for weeks trying to come up with a creative name for that one, trying to tie in like research plus performance / just being, like working out. And yeah, so that design got co-opted by somebody else too, because mine was a little too specific, but we made it happen.
I think definitely our community, like we wanted to facilitate something that was like, oh, like we're in your corner, or
for sure. No, that's awesome.
Where not just like us talking and you listening. Like it was always about the community. It was always about like athletic trainers, and so something that was like more inclusive is something that we kind of wanted. Also, the name really, like I was like, I can't do this if we don't have a good name, because that's something like is valuable to me.
Yeah.
I had a previous business before that I had spent so much time on. Like it was a previous Etsy. I was like selling workout shirts called Ready Set Sweat. So
nice.
the names are really important to me. So I think if if we didn't get something that was catchy and something that we really felt like our vision was kind of captured in, I think that it would be completely different.
A little segue about like just the name and just how fitting it is for our community and us. Like when we were in Philly, we did a social, like an AT corner social.
Yep.
And where we selected, we actually were we had a corner
Nice.
of the facility that we were at.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, wow, this is really fitting. This literally is AT corner.
With the email, because I'm pretty sure it's atcornerd, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Which I could kind of see tying in with the research and side of it. So I didn't know if there was some other creative off of that, or literally somebody had already co-opted atcorner at Gmail, which would be surprising, but.
Right. That's a good question. I can't remember who was taken. I don't remember who was taken. I don't think that it was, but I feel like we were trying to think of something that would be easy to remember. And then we're like, oh, well, nerd, it's a play on words. Randy loves puns and play on words. So we're like, oh, this is perfect, especially with the education portion. I think the email was one of the first things that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Makes sense. So you cover a lot of research, and anybody that's dove into the research, it is overwhelming at best, completely intimidating at worst when you're trying to figure out what you're looking for, how you're looking for it, what can apply, what doesn't apply, and then realizing that the one that you think you found is 25 years old and may or may not apply anymore, which unfortunately, having worked through some schoolwork, like you got to find them within the last 10 years, and it's like, well, that cuts out a bunch of things that could be really actually useful, but I get it. What routes do you go in terms of finding it, determining its usefulness, in terms of application, any kind of best practices, where you access it, how, any of those kind of things that you go about that you would recommend to people to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always start on PubMed. And I'm sure there's like a more systematic way to do this than how I do it. But a lot of times I just depending on the topic, because like when we come up with the topic, a lot of times the inspiration I get is probably just what I've been dealing with in the clinic myself.
Sure.
So then because that's how I used to like do all my reading on my own. It's just like, man, if I got a challenging case, oh, well, I want to learn more about this. So,
and most of the time I don't know the topic until we sit down to record.
Yes.
Nice. always good to come in fresh sometimes. I understand that.
So so I'll just do like a PubMed search, and a lot of times I put in whatever like condition or whatever thing I'm trying to look at, and athletes, right? Because that's my population. So I try to make sure I'm finding something that is a little more specific to what I'm looking for. I definitely try to stay within like 10 years on articles. Sometimes like if the article is really good, like I just was kind of looking at it, I was like, oh, this really kind of looks interesting. If it's like outside 10 years, like 12, 15 years, I'll still maybe give it a look and just kind of see, is this still relevant for me? Because sometimes it is nice to kind of see, like you see all this like new stuff like 2023, 2022, but like that basic article is what kind of laid the foundation of understanding these more advanced ones. So sometimes I like to do that. Luckily being in a DAT program, I now have access to the like the university's library.
Yep.
So now I have like interlibrary loan. I was missing out on that for a couple of years. I was like, man, I missed this because it was harder to get some articles.
Absolutely. Definitely.
But yeah, I would say I pick a question that's just that I feel is relevant, that I'm going through, that, oh, I feel like this would be interesting to know, or something that I kind of think about, like, man, like we really didn't talk about this in school. So I think it'd be kind of cool to kind of read up a little bit more on it. And yeah, I start at PubMed. If I do PubMed first for the actual articles, and then if I need to find the copies, I'll do like, oh, Google Scholar or.
For sure.
I mean, PubMed also has a lot of free text links.
They do. Mm-hmm.
So even if you aren't part of, like, if you're graduated and your school doesn't allow you to have that library forever, you can usually find some free links. We've never paid for an article, so I
refuse to read it if I have to pay for it. I would be very curious outside of institutions who actually pays to read articles. at 50
Yeah.
bucks a pop, I just don't see how it's a
Right.
good value.
No,
No.
not at all. So I know that like the free text links usually, Google Scholar.
Mhm.
Also, if you don't have access to that article specifically, you can scroll down and they have all the citations. So sometimes if you go through the citations, which honestly are, that's where I kind of look for articles, is I find an article that I like and then I go to the citations because I know it's going to be somewhere in that realm of similarity.
Yep.
Sometimes you can find some free articles through those if you're not able to get the original article for free.
And that's the same thing too. Maybe I found the article on PubMed and I'm reading it, and like through their citations, I'll like if they reference something, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll look at the citation list and I'll highlight that for later and be like, oh man, I need to find that one.
Understand that. Yeah, I've used the citations. It's the best way to write a paper when you're looking for more references to throw in there. Save yourself a lot of scrolling and reading if you find the one article you like, and then what ones you can piece off of that.
Absolutely. There's on our website, for each CEU episode or each education episode, we do have the references from what Randy's read.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's looking for a topic like meniscus, you can just scroll to our meniscus episode and then we have all the citations, which is usually within the realm of 10 at the very least, but usually around like 20.
Yeah, 15 to 20 most of the time. And
Quickly.
that is also a nice trick is I basically put all of it into EndNote. So like that's basically my database of all my articles and stuff, and that makes the references so much easier.
Understand that. Yeah, I use OneNote and have kind of all of the ones that I found useful, and it seems daunting at the time, but man, it's nice when you need to go look for something and it's right there for you. I completely get that. So you brought up the topic of CEUs. Again, doing these research episodes and then kind of partnering on with the story ones. Was CEUs always part of the plan from the beginning, or is that something that matured as it went through, just with different opportunities? Again, we were talking, offline that doing the BOC process can be daunting, to say the least. And again, I know that one from personal experience, but how did you guys go about deciding, to do CEUs and, providing that value to your listeners?
Honestly, I think people ask us a lot of times what our vision was. And, I know people are like, oh, what do you think this is going to be in like 5 to 10 years? But honestly, I think we were two kids and a mic, and we were just planning on, just having fun and sharing what we could and connecting with athletic trainers. I think there were some things that we were like, man, this would be really cool. Like CEUs would be really cool. I don't think we were ever like, man, this is like do it or die. And
Sure.
it was never like this is the hill we want to end up on. But I think just the opportunity presented itself. Precision AT, who is our original partner with our podcast, Megan and Mara, who are the two members of Precision AT, they just absolutely saw a vision and really believed in us. And I think we couldn't have done half the stuff and outreach and CEUs that we had without them. I'm not sure where you were thinking, but
no, yeah, I was just gonna say that's like it was always like in our mind, like, oh well, maybe one day that can happen, but it wasn't really the goal of what we were trying to do. Like Sandra said, it was mostly just like, hey, we just wanted to just do this, just see where it goes, just make connections, just do what little part we can. And I still remember starting with Precision AT. Like it literally just started, they invited us to speak at like a virtual conference that they were doing, and that just kind of got the ball rolling. So it was, it came in at a perfect time, definitely for us. I think they would say it came at a perfect time for them, but I think mostly on our end, it came at a perfect time for us. And that's kind of like what we were kind of thinking would happen with our CEUs. It just, hey, if we fall into it, awesome.
Understand that. Kind of the last question, more around the podcast in general, and I'm actually really curious now, knowing more of the backstory of Randy really wanting to start this and Sandy being on the fence. if you had advice for anyone that might want to start a podcast, what would that be, if it's athletic training or otherwise? I know personally, just within athletic training, there's several and they all are fantastic. And,
Mhm.
I'd be lying if I say at times, do you wonder, like, does it get too crowded? Like, is there too many things, or like, how does that play out? And then kind of my own of like, well, if you still enjoy it, then it's probably worth doing. And honestly, for me, and I've said this before, it has been the world's best networking tool that I've ever stumbled upon. And just getting to connect with people I would otherwise never have met, most likely. In the profession. So I'm curious as, advice you'd have, or kind of your thought process if somebody else was thinking about, oh, do I go ahead and maybe start one?
Absolutely. We get this question actually more frequently than I thought we would. Like, I think it's really
Nice.
cool to see that other people are interested in podcasts. I think anyone can start a podcast, and like just showing like how we were just anyone, Um, my biggest advice would be reach out to athletic trainers who have already figured it out. And this is my advice, honestly, for athletic training in general, too, because there are so many people before us who I think we don't pay attention to. They already have this figured out. You don't have this figured out, but you can have this figured out by learning from the people who do.
And do
So
it faster,
yeah.
which is what I wish I would have done always.
Very early on, as honestly, I feel like as soon as we put out that we were making a podcast, Jeremy Jackson from Sports Medicine Broadcast took us under his wing and immediately reached out and welcomed us into the podcast world. And I think that was something that was completely unexpected. But now, like, even from the beginning, like till now, Jeremy Jackson is still a really big part of our podcast, and kind of we, like we talked about before, the mentorship and everything. It happens in podcasting too, and in real life. So he was just a podcast acquaintance, I guess, and now he's a friend.
Fair enough.
So it's pretty cool to see, kind of like, those connections that you were talking about. Also, your audio is going to suck at first. So don't worry about that. Honestly, I think learning from other athletic trainers or even other podcasters and trying to figure out what they've done to improve their audio. I know we've improved it a ton over the years.
And I'd say one thing for me is, like, don't be afraid to, like, try things you're just not strong in. Like, continue to learn, because like social media is not a strong suit for me. Like, how things should be posted, when should they be posted, how you like certain interactions that you have, like what's the more like a quote unquote optimal way. And Sandra does a great job. That's why I always joke, like, if you're ever looking at any of our social media and wondering what happened, it's probably because I did it, not her. But that's the thing, is like, right, I'm learning how to create a cool social media and like do things that will optimize how many people look at it and stuff like that, and like how we interact. So like, that's one thing that I'd say is, like, there's a lot that goes into running a podcast besides the actual content. So don't be afraid to just like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing to learn about it.
Yep, I learned more about XLR cables and different connection things, and we tried to get super fancy super early. And this was before the AT chat one, but we had bought like boom mics with I'm blanking, or that might even be what they're called. Shotgun mics was what they are, with boom sticks, and like trying to get it, and we were trying to go super fancy with the video. And to edit an hour-long episode would take me 4, and it was awful. And we've definitely calmed it down from the video side, thankfully. But yeah, you learn a ton. Not that I'd ever consider myself an audio expert or even close, but yeah, it was fun learning that stuff, and still probably learning lessons, that iPads die, things, all the stuff that happens to you. You don't have the backup audio, even though you promised yourself you'd always have the backup audio. Yeah. Been there more than I care to admit. So,
What got us was the video. Like, there was a moment in time where the video was always a struggle, because initially we were going off of a cell phone, so just like the iPhone. But then we started running into an issue of transferring it.
It wouldn't get off the phone. Like,
Yeah.
it would just stay on the phone. It just lived there. it wouldn't get off.
And then we would try to transfer it to like, oh, like maybe Google Photos, but then like it started taking double the time of the actual episode. So like if we recorded for an hour, it'd almost take 2 hours, and we're like,
Or it would take 2 hours and then cancel itself.
yeah.
Oh man.
And so then we're like, okay, well, we can't really do much with a video on a phone that's just gonna sit there.
And so we were like, oh man, we need to rethink how we're doing the video now.
Yeah, all the things that you never really imagined you'd run into. But that being said, for people listening, like you can get on a podcast platform for free now. There's plenty of options out there. You know, a decent mic doesn't cost you a whole lot of anything. And so if you're going pure audio, you can get started for really pretty affordable. And then, you know, even like you mentioned with your logo, you know, just drawing it up. And if you've got the skills to do stuff, which I don't, you know, to do it digitally with new AI logo generators, they're super slick. Or, you know, Fiverr, I think we got our AT chat one made for $15. It was pretty affordable to kind of get things going, and having people that actually are good at that do it is always a nice thing. So
100%.
anything else around the origin story or just kind of the AT Corner podcast that we haven't covered that you'd like to?
I don't think so.
No, I think we hit
Yeah.
everything. It's funny just thinking about just how far we've come from the idea to where we are now. It's like I always say when people ask, or like when we talk about it, it's been a really cool ride. And like you said, man, we've met so many cool people and have been able to do a lot of cool opportunities because of it. And it's been a fun ride for sure.
Yeah, honestly, like I'm a people person. I'm pretty quiet when you meet me, but like I'm an extrovert, so I just really like the vibe that people bring. And
Sure.
I think the networking aspect of it is just how cool it is to see like how many people who we can connect with. It really came to a head when we went to NATA for the first time, and just really seeing, like, looking around and people coming up to us, or us going up to people who I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been messaging you on Instagram. I've heard all of your athletic training stories, because it really does go back and forth. It's not just, I feel like for us, it's not just people come up to us and they're like, oh, I listened to you. It's like, we can go back. What's your Instagram handle? Oh, I know exactly who you are. I know you sent in this story, and you know, we talked back and forth about this topic. And that's what I really love about our podcast, is we just keep going back to that community.
Yep, I understand that. When I joked and said about it, you know, with the networking, like Rick Cox and I met because of an episode, stayed in touch, did another episode, stayed in touch, kind of going back and forth, put out the AT Daily Journal together, and we've literally never met in person.
Oh, wow.
Several Zoom calls, a lot of just, you know, Twitter messages back and forth, and we've never physically actually met. So it's the power of just the social media and all the aspects of that too is pretty cool. I have no idea when we're going to try and get together, but it'll happen at some point. One more question before we jump into the AT chat ones, just because I remember hearing this from Jeremy Jackson, who we've mentioned multiple times, and you just said the evolution. Do you have a podcast voice that only comes out when you're on the podcast? Because I know he says he does, and his wife calls him on it all the time.
I almost feel like I do because of the intro.
The intro.
Yeah.
Fair, that's fair. And I think that's
really
mostly what she called him out on too, is his intro when he throws on the podcast voice.
Yeah. And like, yeah, no, I was gonna say, I just think about it and I'll be like, welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. Like, I don't know. Yeah. So I would say that is probably mine.
I don't think I have one. I think I also just talk, so that it's not like I do the intro, you know. Also, Randy does like he'll walk around the house and sports announce things. So I feel like that kind of goes into you know, the intro. You can kind of announce.
Well, also to the intro, we do a couple takes, because sometimes like I don't necessarily know how to start it.
Sure.
So
we don't talk about it before. Honestly,
we just shoot from the hip on the start.
It's honestly, no, actually, for every episode, this is kind of behind the scenes. We don't really tell anyone this. I don't share anything before like our story episodes. We just sit down and I'm like, okay, this is what we're talking about, and then we just talk about it.
Yeah.
And then same thing with Randy, like he'll be like, okay, here's our education, which is kind of like for me it's like, oh shoot, I kind of have to sound smart right now because I didn't do any research on this topic. I'm just literally going to bring in what I know. Um but for like story episodes, it's kind of like I like the actual reaction.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really want that to be like
Sure.
oh, we've heard this before, like laugh again.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to keep it real, and so that's kind of like the behind the scenes. We actually don't really plan anything before as far as like sit down.
Yeah.
We used to, I think, like in the early on, like our first few episodes, but I feel like we just found that it's better if we just sit down and talk.
Makes sense to me. Couldn't agree more.
That's how we get those bloopers sometimes.
Yes, it is.
Always good too. Shows that it's not overproduced and very real. So I like that. AT chat questions. First one. Where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Honestly, I think that in the last 5 years we've seen a big change.
Mhm.
So I feel like in the next 5 years I think we're gonna see the effects of that change. I feel like I almost feel like this in my own life where it's like I've hit a lot of milestones. Like last year there were just a ton of things that happened last year that were like kind of it felt like all at once.
Mhm.
And now I feel like I'm living out living out those milestones. I feel like athletic training is kind of the same where a lot of things happened at once, especially with COVID being a big pivoting change to our profession and change to not only how we do things, but how we're seen, not only as healthcare professionals, but also like what we're expected to do. A lot of people have changed also to like appointment systems and kind of like change their own practice as well. But I think like in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the effects of those milestones. So I know that a lot of people have, before we were saying like, don't take jobs that don't pay you well. Like, but I feel like it was just a theory. Like, yeah, we say that you don't want to take those jobs, but then when you're faced with, you have a job offer and nowhere else is offering you, like, what are you going to do? Turn down money? So I feel like now, because there are more and more people who are seeing the value of athletic trainers and more athletic trainers who are seeing the value in themselves, um, I see that our pay is already increasing. I don't know if anywhere else, but in California, I feel like our pay has a lot of places have almost doubled, I feel like.
Yeah.
I feel like when we first got out of school, there were a lot of like $30,000-$40,000 jobs, and now I'm seeing like $60,000-$70,000-$80,000 jobs. So I see that the big milestones that have been happening, I think we're going to see the effects of those playing out.
And to piggyback on that, I think, and I've already started to like see the beginnings of this. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I think work environments are going to start to change. Kind of like with that like pay thing and like the hours. Like I'm seeing a lot of these like D1 jobs. Like there's a lot of jobs in the D1 popping up, and a lot of those jobs aren't closing very quickly, and they're getting desperate for people. And I think a lot of clinicians are starting to learn, you know what, the pay's not good enough for me. I mean, like I'm going to go somewhere where they're going to pay me. I'm going to have better work-life balance, right? So it's not so much about the name anymore, about like, oh, I work at the so-and-so university. I think now it's, no, I kind of value me, and I kind of value the way I want to be treated. I know what I bring to the table as a clinician, and I don't need to work 60 hours a week or be gone 5 days a week, right? So like I think that's going to start to change, and that's actually been really interesting to watch, just how some of these like larger universities that I feel like would have filled pretty quickly are staying open longer, being more open more frequently. So I think that's going to change. I think those kind of work environments.
Couldn't agree more with that. Also knowing that from personal experience. What advice would you give yourself if you could go back when you were a younger athletic trainer? So what advice would it be, and when would you have given it?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, I think kind of along that work environment thing is, and like what we're talking about, like pay and like when you're going into an interview, when you interview a spot, like interview at a place, you're also interviewing them. Make
Yeah.
sure that they actually fit you as opposed to you fitting them. Like everyone, like especially as a young AT, you're so stressed, like, oh, like I gotta get this job, like I need to impress them. And
It's
that's
hard when you don't
true.
have a job.
Yeah,
Best time
right.
to look for a job is when you have one. But yeah, I totally get it.
And like you get so caught up in like, oh, I need to impress them, and of course you don't want to make a bad impression, but also remember, like, you have to be critical of the place you're interviewing at too, right? Because it may not be a good fit for you either. If there are red flags, don't blow them off. Don't be like, oh, it's probably fine. No, because they're probably red flags. So I think that's my biggest thing. And like we've said, it's really hard as someone who doesn't have a job, especially a newly certified athletic trainer who now has 2 degrees to try and pay off. And, they didn't, that whole grad assistant route isn't necessarily there anymore. And you're like, well, I need work experience. And like, it's a tough place for a newly certified, but I still think, like, stay strong. You don't want to necessarily put yourself in a toxic environment. So I think just being critical of where you interview at.
I know. I kind of feel like you were saying, especially when we were talking about when you don't have a job, it's hard to kind of see those things. It took me forever to. I feel like I went on so many interviews before I found like a spot that I actually wanted to. I know that there are some places that I turned down, and it ended up with me working a lot of per diem, a lot of part time, a lot of juggling jobs. But I think that those were all valuable in a way, even though it was really tough at the time. Um, you know, putting yourself, knowing what kind of situation you're gonna put yourself in, is kind of like along those lines. But I would say for me and what I give to my athletic training students is don't sweat the small stuff. It's so easy to get caught up in getting frustrated every single time a coach forgets to tell you when if practice changed. And like, yeah, that could be seen as a big thing, but
Yeah.
Over time, like, what are you going to remember 10 years from now? Is it really a big problem, or is it a small problem? Yes, those are things that, like, don't just brush them off, but if we continually are getting upset and bottling things in and walking around with a chip on your shoulder, you're not going to survive in this profession. There are so many things that you can get upset about, but instead, if you kind of shift your mindset and focus on all the things that you love, for example, like, you just have to find something that, like, grounds you. One of my old jobs, there were some times that things would make me really upset, but I'd walk outside and I'd look. We were right next to the mountains, which I absolutely love, and you could, like, literally from the football field, you could see a huge, beautiful mountain range. And those are things that, like, you have to just kind of focus on those things sometimes, and not like, man, again, I got here and coach isn't listening to me.
What has been the most influential resource you found in your career? PubMed.
Definitely mentors. Definitely mentors.
Mm-hmm.
If we haven't said it enough, I think the people who are in this profession and have already figured it out are so valuable. And maybe, I mean, everyone's still learning, but everyone has figured out something, right? So even young athletic trainers who just got out of school, maybe they're going to be the ones teaching more of the seasoned athletic trainers and doing something that the seasoned athletic trainers are not as well versed in. So someone's already got something figured out. Reach out to those mentors, reach out to those people who have already figured it out. People are always willing to help each other. I think that, especially when you look at, like, the Facebook groups or kind of sometimes social media, you can see that if someone posts something online, there's a lot of people who come out and kind of tear them down.
Yeah.
Those are, I feel like those are people just hiding behind a keyboard. But I think people in real life, like people who you went to school with, people who are your preceptors, people around you, um, they're really willing to help.
Yeah.
More than I think you think they are.
And to piggyback on the mentors, I definitely, when I think back of, okay, what would probably be my most influential resource, and it would have to be Julie Max. So our the former head at Cal State Fullerton, first female president at NATA, like she has been such a big influence on how I am as a clinician and as an administrator. The things that she did for us as a staff to protect us and to protect the student athletes is just, I don't know how she did it every day. Like she was amazing. You know, especially at a D1 institution. Now, granted, like it's a mid-major, we're not talking like Power 5, but still D1 expectations. You know, she would cover someone else's practice to give a staff member a day off, and sometimes that doesn't happen everywhere. Or she had no problem like taking our biggest sports coach like toe to toe. Like there was no intimidation or anything like that. So I think a lot of those things of just the principles that she stood on and how she supported us and our student athletes, and just how even if you did something wrong and she's having a discussion with you, you never felt like you were being reprimanded. You actually felt good about the conversation. Like you walked out like, I am pretty cool, I guess, even though you did something wrong. So I think just the way that she interacted with people was a big influence on me. And especially when I took a similar role as a head athletic trainer, like that's how I wanted to model like my style as, right? I'm, being supportive of the staff. So I think just how I interact with coaches, administrators, and fellow athletic trainers was a big influence on me.
As ATs in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
We laugh because we're full-time athletic trainers, both in the same setting, even though we're at different places. We're both in the community college setting. So we go to work as an athletic trainer. We come home to athletic trainers. Obviously, we have the athletic training podcast, so we got to talk about work outside of work sometimes.
And now school.
And we're in our doctorate of athletic training program, so we're literally athletic training on athletic training on athletic training. And people ask us this all the time because work-life balance is such a huge topic, and especially in athletic training with the burnout levels, like how do we manage?
Yeah.
Honestly, there's more than athletic training, and you got to find those moments that are not athletic training. We like to plan things outside of work. We like to come home and do things that are not athletic training. We really like board games, so kind of coming home and doing something that's not sitting on the couch and watching TV, which absolutely we do a lot too, but like planning things like with friends or having something to look forward to that's not work. Playing with our dog outside, we do that a lot. So
I was gonna say our German Shepherd reminds us when we're not doing anything. She'll usually voice her displeasure.
Yes, she doesn't like it when we just sit down. So essentially just like planning things that are not athletic training so you can look forward to them and kind of change your mindset and change your gears. That's
I think that's kind of what's been big for us. Like for me, like I've always been like athletic training is like, I know this is what I was meant to do and this is what I was passionate about. So yeah, before, like when I was a student, like they'd tell me like, Randy, you can go home. Like you don't need to still be here. So like I've always just been so like gun ho, locked in on athletic training. So it's nice to Sandra and our dog, like it's a good escape.
It's a work hard, play hard.
It definitely is.
Understand that. If you could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, common practice, mindset, whatever of your choosing in the field of athletic training, what would it be?
The biggest thing that I see that I don't understand it. I kind of understand, I guess, a level of insecurity, I guess, but athletic training is a practice, and I feel like I see this mostly online. I see this mostly in like Facebook groups. But when people ask a question, something that they're looking to ask, like, hey, I've never had an ACL tear before. How am I supposed to rehab this? People come out of the woodwork sometimes and say stupid stuff. And I feel like, or, every single time someone posts a video of them taping an ankle, why do we have to come out and comment on how horribly that ankle has been taped instead of celebrating that this person is doing something athletic training and sharing something athletic training? I don't understand why we are under microscope sometimes, especially with such a small like world. I feel like and we're trying to get people to understand what athletic trainers are. Um I don't know why we tear each other down online. I feel like that doesn't really happen in real life as much, except that sometimes like if someone sends, I don't know if this happens in other settings as much, but I know like when, like, let's say a basketball team travels to our team, the athletic trainer doesn't travel with them, for example. So if someone gets hurt, we'll send an email like, hey, this person got hurt, just want to let you know, here's like my soap note or whatever. I think the only time I really see that in real life of ATs tearing each other down is like, man, like they didn't even really like do an eval. They didn't really do this, but it's really like we don't know that whole situation. We have no right to, like, if you were in that situation, maybe you would have acted differently, but that's exactly what it is. Athletic training is a practice.
Yeah.
So I don't understand, unless you're hurting someone else, there's really no wrong way to treat an athlete or a patient.
I think one thing for me that I always see that just like it really grinds my gears is just the toxicity that's built in athletics as like a work environment. And I've seen this just like one, just how student athletes are treated in the just athletics realm. Like, man, like, oh, I'm afraid to say this to coach. I'm like, why? Like, one, you should be in an environment where you're being supported by that person. And two, I think student athletes forget how much power they actually do hold. If you're in such a bad environment, transfer out, right? Like, your value as a student athlete. You could go do that at another institution, make their institution better, right? And I think the same thing goes in athletics in general. There's things that athletics gets away with because it's athletics. Like, same thing, not to keep going back to coaches, right? But that is the most like interacting thing we do. Like coaches that like, I mean, we all see it. The coach that loses his mind on the sidelines and like yelling, and then like even throughout the day, like treats people in a like kind of an off way. But man, if that coach is winning, it kind of is okay, right? Why are we as a society okay with that? I think some of that stuff has to go in, and like the expectation, right? Well, athletics is 7 days a week. You got to be your 7 days. Like, why? Right? Like, why me as an individual, right? Maybe, okay, I get that might be a system. Well, we can probably work out a situation where maybe one person doesn't have to work 7 days a week. So I think just the toxicity as working in athletics, I think I would like to see go away.
Agree with both of you completely and absolutely. Yeah. Last question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
For me, it means being what someone needs, whether that means being as simple as like a listening ear or a guide to healing. People don't know their body as well as athletic trainers most of the time. So I feel like we are able to provide them with a little bit more information on something that they are experiencing. Or if they're going to a doctor or getting MRI or getting something, there's a lot of big words involved or medical jargon. So we can be a medical translator or be their biggest fan when they need it. Honestly, whatever our patients and athletes need to keep doing what they love is where we stand in. We're the jack of all trades. That's what an athletic trainer. It's it's a mold. We fit in where we're needed.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think again, it's going to tie into what I was talking about with like student athletes, and that's my patient population, so that's what I'll kind of gravitate towards. But being the voice for my student athletes, like a lot of them, again, they're afraid to say something to coach, or they're afraid to say something to like maybe peers or like anyone else. And like, I'm here for you, right? I'm not here for this person. I'm not here for this. I'm here for you, right? So making sure that like, I can always see it like when I'm trying to get their game plan. Hey, what do you want to do? And you can tell they really don't want to play, but they're like, oh, I don't know. I will be the bad guy. What do you want to do?
For sure.
So that's my thing. I think making sure that they have a voice, and same thing for the medical system as well, right? Athletics runs a little bit different than the rest of healthcare. So like even the same thing, like if they're having trouble getting into an appointment, like I can help facilitate that, right? And they don't necessarily know how to navigate that very well, or are, oh, well, I don't want to seem like a burden. No. You're not being a burden. I'll be the burden then, right? So to help facilitate that. So I think overall just being there for the student athlete and making sure that their voice is actually heard.
Agree with you there as well. Just to kind of wrap up with everything, if people wanted to connect with you all, reach out, follow you, what would be the best places to do so?
I think we're most active on our Instagram. That's AT Corner Podcast. Wow, that I almost forgot our handle for a second. I wasn't sure if it was at AT Corner, but I think everything is at AT Corner Podcast except for our email, which is at atcornerds, planwords, @gmail.com. I think our email has been kind of funky lately, and it's been sending a lot of stuff to spam. So sorry for some people who we had to reach out to a couple weeks later when we realized that everything was going to spam, and I don't know how much we missed actually. That was kind of sucky, but yeah, honestly, Instagram, you can DM us or just follow. Also, just I like to give the little disclaimer that when we do story episodes, I always put prompts out on our Instagram stories, and I don't look at those for the rest of the week, so I can get all the stories in first before I go through them. So if you DM us like right around a story episode, you're probably not going to get a response from me for a little while.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for taking the time. It was great to finally connect in some way or the other. Hopefully more connection in the future, either online or hopefully at an NATA or something of that sort. But great to meet you all and hear the story, and look forward to talking more in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you so much, Joel.
Of course.
Thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did getting to talk with them. We probably could have gone on longer, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't get this too long. We also chatted quite a bit off mic, but it was great to meet them. If you haven't checked out their podcast, highly recommend it. Also just kind of focusing on other AT podcasts out there. Always a sports medicine broadcast, which we've talked about Jeremy a few times on that, the Candid AT guys, Ryan Stevens with his Catalyzing podcast, the Advantage podcast. There's all kinds of them out there, all with their own unique spin. It is definitely worth checking them all out, getting to hear about all aspects of the profession. And with that, if you want to check out something new in the profession that we put out, the Athletic Training Daily Journal, it's just meant to be passages and prompts and things to get you thinking about both your professional and personal development, challenge you with some things, questions I wish I would ask myself earlier in my career to help grow and evolve. And we would hope you would be potentially interested in that. You can get a 14-day free sample at clinicallypress.org/shop, or find the full journal on Amazon.com. Just search for the Athletic Training Daily Journal. We're the 4th or 5th one down, but check that out. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to catching you all at the next episode.